Hi everyone, I'm Kiron Lebeck from the University of Washington, and today I'll be talking about our work that aims to better understand the security and privacy challenges that users may face from emerging augmented reality technologies, or AR. So imagine if you could take a quick break at work and play a game of virtual basketball with your coworkers without ever actually leaving your office. Or if you and your friends could play with a virtual pet that actually feels like it's part of your real world. These are just a few examples of the many possibilities enabled by AR, which is fundamentally changing how we can interact with digital content in the context of the physical world. Through smartphones, millions of people already have access to powerful new experiences, like these demo videos from AR startup Ubiquity 6. And going even further, headsets from companies like Microsoft, Magic Leap, and Meta are also starting to become available and provide even more immersive experiences. But with any new technology comes the potential for unforeseen uses or capabilities that can negatively impact users in different ways. So as AR continues to evolve and become increasingly ubiquitous, we have to ask, what about security and privacy for AR? To put our work in the context of the broader AR security and privacy space, we as a community have a responsibility to anticipate how malicious actors might leverage these technologies to try and harm users. In practice, the ways that AR may expose users to harm will fundamentally depend upon the kinds of assumptions that users have, how they engage with the technology itself, and how they interact with other users. Additionally, we need to get a sense for the kinds of things that users themselves might be worried about surrounding AR, or how they imagine these technologies could go wrong. And the hope is that by developing this type of broad understanding, we can gain additional perspectives and insights to help us design AR systems that better protect users from harm. So far, there's been some great technical work in the community along a number of directions, and this was captured in a great lit survey earlier this year. So for example, some has looked at defensive techniques to prevent untrusted apps from accessing sensitive information through a device's sensors. Some has looked at output protection strategies to prevent untrusted apps from generating undesirable or harmful content. And others have proposed mechanisms like secure device pairing to facilitate more secure interactions between users. So overall, there's been some really great work along a number of directions in this space, but what's missing? First, prior work predominantly considers single-user AR systems with apps running on the user's own device as potential adversaries. But as these platforms continue to evolve and support more shared experiences between multiple users, like those videos I showed you, we also need to study multi-user AR through a security and privacy lens and broadly consider how users themselves may act as adversaries towards others. And second, even in the context of single-user AR, prior work has mostly focused on conjecturing security and privacy risks and proactively designing technical defenses. And while this work is highly valuable, we don't yet have a good sense for the kinds of concerns that users themselves may have about these technologies, how their expectations might be violated by potential adversaries, or how well these proposed defenses map to users' concerns in practice. So in this work, we want to answer three main research questions. First, what kinds of expectations, behaviors, and interpersonal interactions arise for users when actually engaging with an emerging AR device? And what opportunities for misuse might these suggest? Second, what concerns do users have, both regarding apps running on their own devices and in terms of interactions with other users? And finally, since prior work has already made significant headway on designing more secure single-user AR systems, what new challenges and opportunities arise for multi-user AR? Next, I'll give you an overview of the methodology we use to answer these questions, and we faced a number of decisions when trying to figure out how to best go about doing this. To start, the latest generation of immersive AR has really just begun to emerge and isn't widely available yet. So we don't have much of a basis to predict what users' expectations, interactions, or concerns might be around these technologies. So we designed a qualitative user study to allow us to surface a broad spectrum of themes by observing users engaging with a real AR device firsthand. In terms of the specific technology, we used the Microsoft HoloLens, which is one of the most sophisticated AR headsets available today, which provides powerful immersive capabilities. And since we're interested in multi-user environments, we recruited pairs of participants, and specifically we sought out people with no prior HoloLens experience so that we could observe how the technology both met and shaped their expectations. We carefully selected a set of apps for participants to use that exercised different aspects of AR. So for example, some were single user while others were multi-user, and some allowed for unstructured interactions between users while others had more concrete objectives. And in one case, we built one of the apps ourselves when existing apps didn't provide all of the capabilities that we wanted. And finally, our study was approved by the University of Washington's Ethics Review Board. Our study was comprised of 5 sequential stages, which consisted of either semi-structured interview questions or HoloLens activities. You can find a full description of our study protocol in the paper's appendix, but I'll try and give you an overview of each stage next. We began with a short set of questions to gauge any prior AR exposure participants may have had, either through personal use, observations of others using AR, or in the media. Participants next went through the HoloLens tutorial on the left here, followed by the HoloLens shell on the right. And the shell is a single user app that acts kind of like a 3D desktop, which also allows users to place spatially aware 3D objects throughout their physical environment. These images are taken from the study itself. So here on the right, you can see one person who was trying to put a pair of googly eyes on his partner's head in 3D space. After those apps, we asked participants a few questions about their initial impressions of the HoloLens. And we also had them spend a few minutes brainstorming potential use cases for AR. Through our pilot interviews, we found that including a brainstorming session seemed to help participants think more concretely about these technologies and lead to more rich discussions in the final interview phase. Next, we had participants use 3 more apps. On the left, we have RoboRaid, which is a single-player first-person shooter video game. In the middle, we have Skype for HoloLens, which is a multi-user app where one user is on a HoloLens and the other user is actually on a tablet. The tablet user can see the HoloLens user's first-person perspective, and both users can freehand draw colored lines within a shared 3D view of the world. And since the selection of multi-user apps on the HoloLens App Store was quite limited at the time we conducted our study, we built a second app ourselves that allows multiple users to create and move blocks around in a shared 3D space, and you can see this on the right. We concluded with a set of semi-structured interview questions around 3 main themes. First, we revisited participants' impressions of the HoloLens to see if they may have changed since their initial impressions. And then we asked them to discuss concerns they might have in the context of 3 open-ended adversarial scenarios. These included harassment involving other users, interactions with untrusted apps, and interactions as bystanders to other AR users. Even though we gave participants this set of scenarios to consider, we didn't provide them with any examples of the types of things that these adversaries might do in practice, instead allowing participants to surface the specific concerns that they themselves had. And finally, we asked them to reflect on their multi-user experiences and in what kinds of situations they might prefer single or multi-user apps. And as I mentioned before, you can see the full details of our interview protocol in the paper's appendix. So that summarizes our study protocol, and now I'll dig into some of our findings. We recruited 22 participants in 11 pairs, and there was a mix of genders, age ranges, and professional backgrounds. Participants generally had little to no prior AR exposure, and we recruited people who had some kind of pre-existing relationship with their partner, in the hopes that they would feel more comfortable experimenting with the technology and potentially pushing boundaries with each other. We organized our findings according to our 3 main research questions, and I won't have time to discuss all of them today, so I'll try and give you some of the highlights. Recall that we're interested in understanding how users' expectations might be violated by potential adversaries. So we'll begin by taking a look at some of the expectations and interactions that we observed during the study. One observation that actually surprised us a lot was how immersed participants got in their HoloLens experiences, despite important technical limitations of the device, like its small field of view. One participant captured this feeling when he said he was kind of getting mixed up between AR and real life. And on the right, you can see the same participant physically ducking to avoid being shot by a virtual laser beam in the RoboRaid app. One of the most striking themes around this sense of immersion was the projection of physical properties onto AR objects. For example, one participant felt like he was going to physically trip over virtual blocks on the ground around him, and we were really surprised to find that these virtual objects elicited these sorts of real physical reactions like this. Another common assumption was that AR would be shared by default because the physical world is shared, and AR acts as an extension of a user's view of this shared physical world. Or in one participant's words, because it's like through my eyes and I'm used to being a human. We also saw participants trying to interact with each other in some interesting ways. So you might recall this image of one person putting a pair of googly eyes on his partner from earlier in the talk. Well, it turns out there was actually a pretty common trend of participants trying to visually modify each other in different ways. So for example, one person in this pair put a cat head on her partner's real head, and her partner used a virtual globe to a similar effect. Through their interactions, some participants also violated their partner's expectations of object ownership. At one point, a participant said, "He's messing with my blocks," and his partner replied, "I stole his block and I'm like carrying it around." In another case, one participant wanted to see if he could use virtual objects as physical barriers to hide from his partner. So he crawled behind a pile of virtual blocks, and if you look closely, you can see his shoes sticking out here on the right. And then after some time, he popped up from behind the pile to surprise his partner. And what we'll see is that these types of lighthearted interactions actually seem to form the basis of a rich set of concerns that participants raised later in the study. So let's talk about those concerns next. What kinds of things were participants generally worried about? We saw a range of themes emerge here, some of which have been conjectured as potential issues in prior technical work. And what we found here was that real users actually raised these concerns themselves after only limited interaction with an emerging AR device. For example, the feelings of immersion that participants experienced raised concerns. Or in one participant's words, "This could go really wrong. It's much more realistic than I thought it would be." More concretely, participants identified ways that AR could cause different types of physiological harm to users. For example, one person considered distracting the driver of an AR-enabled car by throwing a digital object at them that to the driver feels like it's physically coming through the windshield. Another common concern was the idea of deceptive content misleading users about the physical world. Two participants had a really interesting back and forth about the potential consequences of future AR systems that can generate photorealistic content that might be hard to distinguish from the real world. And they used an example of an open manhole in the street where in the future you might not be able to tell if it's the real thing that you have to dodge or if it's AR. So those concerns had to do with what users themselves are seeing on their own AR devices. But participants also raised concerns about what other people with AR devices might be seeing on their devices. One example of this was the ability to visually modify people. One participant asked, "Can you do that with the HoloLens, change somebody? Like you're looking at somebody and you can change what they look like?" She then considered the psychological implications of this type of feature, asking, "Can you imagine people married and they imagine somebody else?" And as we saw during the study, participants tried to visually modify each other in different ways. So finally, I want to briefly focus in on some specific challenges for multi-user AR situations and some of the ideas that participants directly raised around these. So for example, one participant said, "If somebody started making all of my blocks or all of my things disappear or started putting a bunch of windows in my face, I would feel so powerless." In light of these concerns around object ownership and the ownership of physical personal space, participants brought up a lot of ideas around access control for AR. For example, one person said, "If access to apps was not controlled, then anyone could just interrupt your environment at any time." Participants had lots of ideas around both view and edit permissions for AR, and some even had ideas for specific mechanisms that AR systems might employ. For example, using a particular physical wall as a backdrop for shared content, with everything else made private by default. In analyzing participants' concerns, we also uncovered a number of additional design challenges and opportunities for improving the security and privacy of multi-user systems. And I won't have time to talk about these all today, so you can check it out in the paper. So today I've given you some of the highlights from our findings, but a lot of additional themes emerged from our studies. So as I mentioned, you can find much more information in our full paper. And with that, I want to briefly step back and reflect on our work's implications for the broader AR security and privacy research agenda. Multi-user AR is already here, and we're going to see rapid growth in the number of shared experiences available to users in the coming years. But as participants discussed, there are some really serious ways these experiences could go wrong, and we need to consider technical defenses for these multi-user systems while the technology is still relatively young and malleable. Additionally, we need to keep engaging with users. Participants had a lot to say, and factoring users' perspectives into the design process will be critical to ensuring that AR technologies can appropriately meet users' needs. And finally, even though many of these issues sound like problems for far future technology, we found that today's AR technologies are already sufficiently immersive to elicit a wide range of concerns. We don't need to see significant advancement in the underlying technology for these issues to start manifesting in practice. All it will take is increased adoption of today's technologies for users to start facing potentially serious security and privacy risks. And with that, I want to thank my collaborators at UW, Kimberly Ruth, Yoshi Kono, and Franzi Rosner, as well as everyone who participated in our study. And thank you all for your attention, and I'm happy to take questions.
I think it's working.
All right. Okay. So that was really interesting. As somebody who has an interest in virtual reality, not augmented reality, I'm curious if you have extended any of your research ideas to virtual reality. There's already anecdotes about harassment in shared virtual reality spaces, and I feel like there's a lot more potential for that in virtual reality.
Yeah, we haven't thought about virtual reality explicitly. We've, just in meetings and stuff, considered the ways that some of these issues might extend there, but we haven't done any systematic exploration of that space yet.
Okay. Yeah. Is that something you'd consider in the future?
Yeah, definitely. We've just focused on AR for the past few years, but I mean, VR is, I also find VR very interesting too, so I would definitely be interested in looking more at that, yeah.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, really interesting talk. Vinny Monaco, Army Research Laboratory. Just wondering, have any of the users had any exposure to Black Mirror or other sources of, where they might get ideas before they end up what kind of...
I think a couple users had seen Black Mirror. Some people referred to Iron Man. So in the first questioning phase of the study, we asked them where they might have seen AR before. Some people referenced things like Iron Man or Minority Report. One or two, I think, referenced Black Mirror.
Neat.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you for the talk. Joshua from Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. I'm asking because I think some other people might wonder the same thing. I guess when I think of securing an iPhone or a web app or something, I don't think I need to go talk to the average iPhone user and ask them what they think security needs to look like. So I guess what's sort of your reasoning for looking to average users to brainstorm what problems might be?
Yeah, I think as researchers, we spend a lot of time thinking about the potential security and privacy issues that these technologies might raise. But as experts, our perspectives are inherently different than people who might have less exposure to this or less of a academic or technical interest in the technology. So there might be ways that we can't foresee that these users could have concerns or raise potential issues. So until we explore it, it's hard for us to know. And I think AR is so young and so new that we're at the stage where it makes more sense to start looking at these questions before they're kind of ingrained in society.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Cynthia Irvin, Naval Postgraduate School. Have you considered the dichotomy between using AR as augmented reality for authentic reality, where you don't put weird heads on people, and fantasy augmented reality? How are the users able to distinguish one from the other?
Could you clarify what you mean by fantasy augmented reality?
Well, where you put globes and...
And so authentic augmented reality would be content that is directly pertaining to something in the physical world, like seeing a label of somebody's name above their face or something like that?
Or helping to augment a real situation with more information about the real world?
I see. Yeah. So we've considered lots of different use cases for AR. The current state of these immersive technologies, it's mostly things like games that are available right now. So we don't have too many, I guess, like authentic reality, and it's, if I'm using that term correctly, we don't have too many apps that fall under that category available yet on devices like the HoloLens. But personally, I think
We do.
Yeah? Oh. We didn't have them available on the HoloLens App Store, I guess, at the time we conducted the study. But yeah, I think those would be really interesting to explore as well, especially in more like public spaces and places where people are interacting with each other in different ways in the physical world. Yeah.
Sadly, we're running out of time. Sorry, maybe you can take the question offline. Let's thank Kiron again.